My name is Scott. Welcome to Solid Ground. Have a question for our folks today. Have you seen the news on the most recent Nobel Prize? No? Okay. This is basically it looks like another kind of validation of some quantum mechanical considerations that have to do with Bell's inequalities. And I'm wondering if some of our longtime attendees of Solid Ground see a problem with it, which is where it's a validation of Bell's inequality, but it's a Nobel Prize. And my fear is that the logical contradiction eventually is going to work its way out. So if that doesn't become a problem, then some guys are in for some congratulations. And I could do this all day. The frequency is variable over time, but we're hoping it decreases, maybe rapidly. I assume that some way of introduction is warranted, as the total number of people in the class who are unknown to me now meet or exceed the total number of people who are known to me.
I'll say quickly, Kate and I are getting married now, and so many people decided to come into town, and some of them we had to drag out of bed and threaten. But we're very happy that they decided to join us.
Okay. Well, in honor of that, then what we can do, I will provide the normal caveat, but with a little bit of emphasis on it. We have been recently talking about modern social thought and philosophy, and sort of how it interacts with the philosophical and theological points that we have recently come to. So we can continue on that for today, or in honor of the guests can pick whatever topic they want, and we can dive into that one for at least this period. So I will turn it over to y'all. And this is solid ground, which means at any point in the discussion, one can raise one's hand and be like, this is terrific, we've been headed this way for the last 4 weeks. Let's now make a 90-degree turn and go off this way. And rather than resist it, we tend to encourage it to the point where some of the more responsible people in class are like, that's not what we're taught. Mark will be like, that's not the point we've been making. Oh, okay, thank you, Mark. But yeah. Yes, sir.
My vote is have them pick a different topic so we can move away from this whole
And that'll tell you how much this one's loved, yes. This is what we were one of the people that picked the topic.
It is. And we really haven't spent a whole lot of time on this.
Right.
Well, we will.
We probably will. More than we think that we will. Of course.
Why don't you have a question?
I'm still waiting for the gears to start turning.
Okay.
It's very late night.
Maybe you have more questions than you realize.
No.
Yeah, the bride and groom probably also get an honorary selection as well.
But don't they have to agree?
No, this is the last time. This is the last time they don't have to agree.
So what if I've looked at the arguments and I've looked at the science and the theological responses, and at the end of the day I just don't believe it, I don't buy it, I don't have faith?
That's a very good question. In fact, been talking with some people about what would it look like to talk to even modern media figures who have made a living off of saying, let's present an objective opinion here, let me be open-minded, let me talk about these kinds of things. And presumably some of these people are in contact, and when I say these people, podcasters and so on, who can have anybody on their show they want and will have access to all the different points of view, and because of status, et cetera, may get some of the best representatives of those points of view. So more than anybody prior to the advent of the internet, they would have access to lots of different points of view and presumably hear some of the best arguments for and against. If you say, well, I've listened to all these arguments, I've listened to, so I want to say there's a difference between believing something and thinking you believe something. And it's a very important distinction. And what I was thinking to do was basically in a conversation with somebody, and this sounds bad, I'm going to give it this language, but I'll tell you why it's not really that, but almost lay a trap for the other person. Insofar as I'm asking questions, the purpose of which is not solely to get the data from those questions, but to set up a question that happens further. And you could either call that preparatory or you can call it a trap, and I tend to call it a trap because at the end of the day, you're hiding your intent from the person that you're asking. But if it's, yes, sir?
Which is why we often don't answer your questions.
Right, because I am walking a trap. Fair. The point is fair. Like everybody in here is familiar with this one, right? But when you ask somebody questions like, in a vacuum, so to speak, without having brought up some other topic, basic questions like, are you a fan of the causal principle? You know, where we believe that causes precede effects, that if something happens, it didn't happen spontaneously, it happened for some cause. There was some reason or scientific law behind it. There was some cause. You know, you ask them a question like that. Ask them whether they're a supporter of modern science. Ask them what they think about modern cosmology. Ask them, and you can ask all these questions and you'll get someone to turn around and say something like, yes, I believe in the causal principle. Yep, that was a check mark. I'm a big fan of modern science and all its deliverances, and all things being equal, we ought to trust basically the consensus of science, especially where we have good proofs or lots of evidence. So, you know, I want to see a mathematical proof, that kind of thing, or a good evidenced argument. And so if you have all these, you know, you go through and you're like, yep. And then you say, well, then do you believe, do you believe the universe is all of time, space, matter, and energy? And you talk about what the multiverse is, and you mean, and say, you know, when I'm saying universe, I mean all that is. And if the universe is a multiverse, then I also mean multiverse. Okay, yes, then I think that's all that there is. So they will go down and say yes to all of those. And then you run like the cosmological argument and say, if the universe began to exist, then the universe has a cause. That just comes from the causal principle that they've already agreed to. The universe began to exist, which is standard Big Bang cosmology, and basically almost all the other cosmologies that are not widely acknowledged to have major problems in them, like lethal problems in them. So you've got all the deliverances of science. In fact, Stephen Hawking famously said that all the evidence, not some, but all the scientific evidence was that the universe began to exist X billion years ago. And so if you say, okay, yeah, we've agreed to those, then they've already agreed to the two premises of an argument that deliver you something like, that deliver you exactly, then the universe has a cause. And then you say, well, if the universe is all of time, space, matter, and energy, then whatever caused it is non-temporal, non-spatial, immaterial, and enormously powerful. And then you run an argument that says, like, if you have some state, quantum or otherwise, that is moving in some direction, you can't have a change of state from one state to another without that state change initiator either being permanent or temporary. And if it's temporary, there's got to be some reason for it. If it's eternal in the past, it would not have an initiation point. If it wasn't, then it would be constantly causing universes to exist. Both of those are obviously not the case. So then the only potential cause of the universe had to go consciously from a state of, we are not in a universe creating condition to we are in a universe creating condition, which plausibly speaking, the only non-temporal, non-spatial, immaterial entity of which we know is a mind. So we have an enormously powerful personal mind that's the cause of the universe. So you can when you run that argument, people will turn around and say, no, that's not what I mean. But it is what you believed up until the point that you realized that the beliefs that you have, when you add them together, also equal another belief that you didn't think that you had. And the reason that you didn't have it is in one sense that you actually held contradictory beliefs, but you didn't know that. And the other one is you haven't added your beliefs up sometimes. Anybody who's attempted to balance a checkbook or wondered where the money in their bank went after spending only a few dollars here and there, multiple times, yes, but surely that didn't add up to this thing. And surprise, surprise, it did in fact add up to that thing. So just because you say, I've looked at all this stuff and I don't believe it, doesn't mean that you're justified in doing so. Because one of the responsibilities of a thinker, I think it's safe to say, is you have to work out the implications of your own thoughts. We don't give any credence to people who roll a large, who take the brakes off of a truck and let it roll down a hill into a crowded neighborhood on the excuse of like, well, all I did was pull the brakes on it. I didn't really think about what was going to happen afterwards. So we, in our own personal responsibility, we think that if you do or think something, and there's some action along with it, and believing things is an action. Why is believing things an action? Because belief simply is living in accordance with the thoughts that you have. That is to say, I can say, I think the chair, everybody's heard the chair example, I can say I think the chair will support me, but it's not obvious that I believe it until I sit in it. And presumably, if I actually believe the chair will support me, then there's no cognitive decision going on right before I sit in the chair of like, hold on a second, let me look back at my thoughts and determine whether or not this is a good set of beliefs to hold. You just go and sit in the chair if you believe it. It's a natural outworking, a natural consequence of your thoughts that this chair will support you. So too, the philosophical positions that you hold, or the reasonable positions that you hold with respect to science and modern culture and how you should interact with people and all that kind of stuff. So no, I don't think you get to stop and say, well, I've looked at the evidence and therefore, and I still don't believe it. So it's not, what's the conclusion? Therefore the evidence shouldn't be convincing? The evidence wasn't convincing to me? Okay, it wasn't convincing to you, but why wasn't it convincing to you? O.J. Simpson trial had several people say the evidence was not convincing to them. Both ways. But the evidence probably should have been determinative, fairly determinative. I use that one. I need to get a new one because that one was fair. That one's so old that not everybody in the room is going to know that one. But
a lot of people that went, what?
Right. And yeah, I think the subsequent, I'm working on the subsequent understanding is that based on the civil case, that the belief that the evidence fairly strongly supports and everybody believes that he did in fact kill the two people.
But aren't you getting to a point where not that it is a mind, but that it is something? So whether you believe science, yes, it was the Big Bang, that's it, and we don't know what caused the Big Bang, as opposed to, yes, it was God created the universe, and we don't know, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, what we don't want to do is over-represent what our conclusions are. Like there should be a deductive argument, but we do know what the cause of the Big Bang, the properties of it. So whatever, if the universe that is caused is time, space, not includes, but just is time, space, matter, and energy, then whatever caused it can't be that because something can't pre-exist itself as a cause. You can't, if it doesn't exist, it can't cause itself to exist.
As we know science currently.
Well, no, that's simply logical. That's metaphysical in nature. That's not a scientific conclusion because the scientific conclusion is a deliverance of the scientific method, and the scientific method is hypothesize, test design, test, observe, test report, etc. I guess you could observe first, depending on where you put your hypothesis in that. But in doing so, like that's not what we're doing to get to here. What we're saying is, if time has to exist, if time is what was created, then time can't be part of the cause. If matter what was created, then matter can't be part of the cause. If all time was created, if all matter was created, if all space was created, if all energy was created at that point, then none of that can be part of the thing that created it. That is not a scientific point. That is a logical point. Yes, ma'am.
Aren't all minds also created?
If there is a good argument, a separate argument for there is at least one mind that is not created. So the minds, you might say, well, my mind, we have good reason to believe is created. And I think that you could work to that conclusion. But that just because your mind is created doesn't mean all minds are created. But what we said was all time. If by the universe we mean all time, space, matter, and energy, then it cannot be temporal, spatial, material, or energetic. Matter and energy are equivalent under Einstein's principles, but yes.
Oh, well, that's almost answered, because you're saying whatever created can't be time, space, matter, but then you have energy there.
Yeah, matter and energy are equivalent by E equals mc squared, so if you consider those to be the same, and by that we mean energy, a physical energy in a physical world. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, there's a lot to unpack in there, but so you're making an argument that this explanation should explain a powerful entity creating the universe, correct? Now, what if it's more plausible to say, well, sure, we can infer that, but we can't, prove that, and to somebody, it's more reasonable for them to just simply say, I don't know, than to prove.
So So I would say two things on that front. One, I think you can prove that. So when we use the word proof, we mean a proof in a particular way. And this is stealing from Bill Craig, but the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, Alan Guth, Arvin Borde, Alexander Vilenkin came together to make a theory that basically shows that any universe that's on average expanding must have begun a finite time ago at a singularity. And so you get out of a proof, not an argument, but an actual proof that says, no, the H in our, the factor that shows whether you're on average expanding in our universe is obviously that of a universe that's been expanding on average. So therefore we know for a fact that no matter how many iterations of contraction, et cetera, it goes through, it is on average expanding. So, but to quibble with one of the initial points, I'm not actually here to make this argument. I'm answering a question. So let's make this a conditional statement. If you think that this is convincing, okay, so which is to say, or let's say if this is logically sound, not if you think it's convincing, if this is logically sound, and you believe that things that are logically sound ought to be believed, then this should be convincing to you. So my point would be, not everybody believes all logically sound arguments, but you'll hear almost everybody in this part of the culture say that we should believe things that are logically delivered to us. So that is a problem. And if the problem is, yes, it's logically sound, I have no reason to believe it's not logically sound. From what I understand about logical soundness, this is logically sound, yet I'm not convinced. Then the problem is not with the data, it's with the computer, is one way of looking at it. That's the point I'm making.
Well, I think they'd say they have overriding defeaters. Because like the closest I've seen to someone is like rational and like heard all the arguments. He's like, oh, I want to believe, but it's like I'm not. And he didn't say it at that point, but in other videos, basically his point is like he observed so much animal suffering that like that basically is an intrinsic defeater for him for like a maximum good being. So he's like, I have this defeater that I'm observing, and that's basically overriding even like the causal principle idea. So it's like I can suspend the causal principle and something weird could be going on in the universe, but this like other thing that I observe is disproving that one hypothesis.
Well, so there's a problem with this, the significant problem with this argument. And for those that aren't familiar, the term defeater he's using is one of Alvin Planning's reformed epistemology viewpoints that says basically you're rational to hold a basic, whatever your properly basic belief is until you encounter a defeater for that belief. So you kind of come to the philosophical problem with a number of beliefs. Like, I guess this world is real, you know, it seems like it has these certain features, and until you encounter a defeater for it, you're rational to believe that. Now, what we're talking about, though, is specifically a place where the defeater is not a rational defeater. So as an example, I'll give you an example of the Earth is flat. So absent any other data, if you were just standing out in the parking lot, you might conclude that the Earth is flat for kind of good reason. You would say, like, it seems this way. It seems like the sun goes from over there, it goes to over there. I don't feel myself moving. Like, this is, the Earth is flat and the sun goes around the Earth. That's not an unreasonable conclusion given the very little data that you have of just standing on an apparently flat surface and seeing the sun move across the sky and not feeling like you're moving yourself. All this makes sense. But once somebody starts presenting evidence to you and says, well, let's go walk in this direction, how does the shadow angles change? Let's go shoot a laser this direction. What does it imply about how far the Earth is dropping off? Can you calculate that? And like the Greeks calculated the curvature of the Earth back well before Christ's time, fairly accurately too. So there's, when presented with that kind of evidence, one should then turn around and say, well, you shouldn't say, well, I still just feel like it's flat. And I really feel like it's flat, and I really don't feel like I'm moving. You're telling me I'm blasting through space at hundreds of thousands of kilometers a second, and I just don't feel it, man. Like, see, we can't be moving. And you're like, okay, inertial frames, this is how inertial frames, let's go get in the car. I tell you what, let's go get in the truck, let's drive, and then we'll put on the brakes and we'll not put on the brakes. Now do you get it? And the guy's like, yeah, no, I see that principle, but no, I just don't, I can't overcome the feeling. You can't overcome the feeling not because you haven't been given good evidence for it, but that properly basic belief has encountered a defeater. And the defeater is not adequate to defeat the defeater, which he does, by the way. I'm not the one making up the term defeater, so don't blame me for that one. That is, in short, you have to know whether a defeater, you can't just have a defeater. You have to know whether that defeater is logically warranted. And secondly, if you have a properly basic belief and it encounters a defeater that logically ought to overcome that properly basic belief, and you still just adhere to the properly basic belief, you're no longer warranted in holding your properly basic belief. So says Plantinga, at any rate, in this epistemology. Okay, so there was another hand up. It was yours, sir, I think.
Oh, just, how do you deal with the argument of that our universe is just one universe and it was created by another universe which was created by another, like, eternal.
Yes.
There's some sort of
Yes, eternal cycle kind of universe.
yeah.
So again, I will answer the question in deference to the guests, but this is not the point in deference to the groom. The point in deference to the groom, right? So I'm going to start. I'll see if I can start a fight here between your guests and you, right off the bat. So cyclic universe is the idea that we're going through a series of expansions and contractions or something like that, and that the universe recompresses itself down to some singularity or something like that. The problem is there's no mathematical model where this singularity forms adequately to leave you in an entropic position that allows you to go in this direction. So it's a heavily ugly mathematical argument, but at the end of the day, this is not contentious. These epicycles of a universe, this cyclic theory of the universe, has long been known to be impossible mathematically.
I mean, there's more like the multiverse, like, I don't know.
Now, multiverse is a different idea. The main interpretation of
there's the idea that there's multiverses and that when they collide or whatnot, that a new universe is actually created and ours is a creation of two previously colliding universes.
yes. So number one, to point all this stuff out, all multiverse theories, including brain universes that interact and thus create, that technically in the stuff that's been cited as possible evidence for brain universes has not been about the creation of another universe, but rather the impact of two universes, so to speak. But first, I would point out that one doesn't have to discuss that at all, because when we say the universe in this argument, we mean all universes. So whatever, the universe is supposed to be uni, one, verse, word. So one word to cover all of physical reality. So take the word universe and say, by that word, we mean all physical reality. And someone says, well, I'm talking about the multiverse. And I'll say, are you talking about all physical reality? Yes. Okay, that's the word I'm using universe for. You want to use multiverse? We can use the word multiverse. But whatever word means all physical reality. So forget brain theory, forget any of that kind of stuff. All of those, by the way, are included in Borg, Guth, Lincoln. So all those are accounted for. Brain, universes, multiverses, et cetera. Say again?
So entropy is still an issue.
Right, because entropy is about, if we know one thing about all of our physical laws is that they can be organized into entropic states, and it's that entropy is a measure of that disorder and organization, and to measure the order of disorganization in combination with any physical laws at all are going to deliver you some result as a result of some pre-existing condition, state.
In addition to potential and actual infinites.
Right.
So
For which there are no actual infinites.
so there are additional issues that with a multiverse that bring you back to considering everything as just the time-space matter.
I will give, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, just the idea that one universe somehow created the next one is just kind of, it's like, where did we come from? Well, aliens populated it. It just sort of throws it back to a previous state that you still have to have
Account
the same
for.
questions and the same problems.
Right, and the same solution applies to those as well. Yes, ma'am.
I was thinking about the original question, I hope you don't mind.
That's the most polite way I've heard anybody say, like, you guys are off topic again. Next time, can you say that?
Sorry.
I love it. That was outstanding.
I would like to apologize.
Your question is, someone has heard all this evidence and they still don't believe, then wouldn't the answer be you ask them what's important to them? There's obviously
Yeah.
evidence that they're not making the assumptions you are, they're not following you because maybe they don't agree with some of the terms you use or something.
So
And you can't know until you start asking.
I combined this good observation with this observation, which that you made earlier. I like to put it in terms of scales. So I'll say, like, you weigh what you believe on some scales, so to speak, of like, is this logical? Let's put it up there and see if it meets the standard of logical, and that's why I believe things. So we claim to believe things all the time for reasons that turn out that we don't rigorously hold in multiple points of our life. So as an example, I might say, do you think you shouldn't eat anything that's unhealthy for you? And you'd say, like, yeah, generally speaking. Okay, do you think bacon is, I'm going to say this because I'm a huge defender of bacon. In fact, after the philosophy and theology I hold, bacon is dirt. So if I'm defending eating bacon, I'm joking. If I'm defending eating bacon, but I say I shouldn't eat anything unhealthy, but that I believe that bacon is unhealthy for me, then there's an inconsistency in there. And then I need to qualify it in some way and be like, well, okay, occasionally it's not a problem. Or alternately of like, yeah, it's going to kill me, but I don't care. So you have to abandon one of the beliefs in there somewhere. So to the idea of, do you have to have a rigorous proof to believe something? This is what happens oftentimes is people will believe things like, I think jogging is good for you. I think I should bike to work rather than drive to work. I think that when I interact with, academic papers are in the main accurate. I think like all these things that you hold on to as beliefs, but you do not have proofs of any of them. You boast, like inference, you had used the word inference, not dismissively, but as some lower, like, well, it's just an inference to that one. All scientific reasoning is inference to the best explanation. Any reasoning that's not scientific, that is to say, that's not simply inference to the best explanation, is metaphysical, logical reasoning that's deductive in nature. There is no deductive part of this. The scientific method is not deductive. The scientific method is inductive. So everything science believes in terms of the deliverances of the scientific method are inductive truths at best. And they can be organized as evidence in a deductive argument. But if you want proofs, you're into deduction. If you want proofs that are like absolute, that this is the truth and this is not the truth, not that this is very probably the truth, then you're into deductive arguments. And there are no scientific deductive arguments. There are deductive arguments that use scientific evidence in support of one or more of their premises. So again, we have to weigh on whatever scales we claim to believe are the right scales. That's very important. And unless we want to be hypocrites, you have to use them fairly. So I'll come back to you since you asked the initial question for initial rejoin.
What's the point of all this navel gazing, I guess? Like if I'm happy with who I'm at, like,
Well,
this is fun, but.
to the person that says, so the point of all the navel gazing is, what do I actually believe? And the point that I would make to most, maybe all of us, but to most people out there is, do you believe that what you believe is important in your life? Now we can drive all the way down to why, but presumably people are like, yes, you should believe stuff that's true. I don't want to believe stuff that's false. Okay, what's your method for determining the two? Well, my method is, and then they should lay out for you a description of what the scales are. Well, at least they'll give you one description. Then you follow up and say, is the method of truth discovery you just laid out, is that the only reason you believe things are true? Because in here was not, well, my mom told me this when I was a kid. But you still believe a bunch of stuff your mom told you as a kid. Like you still think that you shouldn't go swimming until an hour after you eat? You know, that's not true. Where'd you hear that? Mom told me that, right? So give mom a hard time here. What do you actually believe? What are the different scales you're using? And if this is actually important to you, you said you thought it was important, this is actually important to you, then don't you believe that one of the most important things that you can learn in this life is how you measure truth? And don't you believe you should be fair? And if you do believe you should be fair, then why not stick with then use your measure of truth evenly and don't put your thumb on the scales for one side or another. And when someone turns around and says, yeah, I've heard all the arguments, I don't see any logical problems with them, but it's just not convincing for me, they've got their thumb on the scale. And that is intellectually dishonest. And if you really wanted to poke somebody in the eye in the conversation, you could say, well, you're being intellectually dishonest. Is that how you want to be? And then you can go. Then you can not talk to them for the next 6 months. Right. But if you're being self-reflective on this one, if this is a question you're bringing up to yourself, then ask yourself the hard question: am I not being intellectually dishonest? Do I want to do that? And that, by the way, counts not just for people who don't believe in God, as I think is extremely well evidenced, for Christians who hold theological points that they only got from the pulpit or from their parents or from some Sunday school class or from whoever their favorite author is or from unknown why he's not yet canonized, C.S. Lewis, only because he's a Protestant hero, I think more than a Catholic hero. But why is that not incredibly convincing? Why are some of these things not incredibly convincing to people? And it's because they got their thumb on the scale.
I think the question about what do we believe is what, before I became a Christian, I like to think that I had strong beliefs, I had good reason for them, but the main reason was it served me.
Right.
You know,
But did it serve you well?
oh,
So it allowed.
it served what I thought was important.
Right. There are two ways to walk through life at least. One of them is maintaining one's own mental state because it makes you feel good. You think it makes you as happy as you can be to believe that you're right. And there's this sense that, and we get this all the time. And if you're a Christian, you've had this thought, which is this. I'll give you the example. And if you haven't had this thought as a Christian, raise your hand because I have a subsequent line of questioning I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever sat through a sermon or a presentation by a missionary where they're like, and then this is what I did, and I knew that it was the job of every Christian to sell all their riches, give them to the poor, and go off and live in Papua New Guinea and and work for New Tribes Missions. And you've had the question of your own, like, is that what I'm actually supposed to do? Like, is the truth that Jesus is talking to the rich young ruler was not specific to the rich young ruler, but that was instruction to all of us? Because there are portions of the church and in history where vows of poverty and chastity were considered a duty by anybody who was serious about their faith. That's the reason monks became monks, was that, like, if you're really a Christian, this is what you'll do kind of argument. But if that were the truth, do you want to know it? Or are you happier basically being like, well, at this point I could argue that I didn't really know that was the case, so I'm just doing the best that I know how to, right? How much do we do this in our own lives? And my argument is that we spend most of our time with our eyes closed and our hands over our ears as human beings, because the willingness to open up your whole life and be like, I'm going to navel gaze for a while, and then whatever the deliverances of that navel gazing are, is I'm going to completely change my life as a result, including if that means basically being like, hey, it was great knowing you guys. I'm moving to Ecuador.
Using an example you used the other week is, how do you convince a man who's married to another man that he would be happier if he wasn't?
Yes. So she brings up thank you for reminding me. Part of the answer to this was, in those two viewpoints is an unasked question. Which one's going to make me happier? So my argument to we have friends, acquaintances, etc., that are gay, and some of them living in like gay marriage type of situation. When they ask why do I object to their lifestyle? Don't you just want me to be happy? And my answer is, yeah, I do want you to be happy, and that's why I object to your lifestyle. It's not that you can't be happy, but it's that this is the level of happiness that you think represents happiness. And I'm telling you it actually goes all the way up to the ceiling. And and this is the exact same argument I use to couples in heterosexual non-marriages, like living together, or guys that just have a bunch of different girlfriends or whatever. Like, yeah, I understand you think this makes you happy. And I understand you have a measure of happiness in doing so. I'm just telling you that when you compare this level of happiness to that level of happiness, they're not on the same order. And it's difficult, of course, that you're open to the charge back of, well, that may be the case for you, but that isn't the case for me. This makes you and your children and whatever else, that makes you that much happier, but it may not be the case for me. And then you have to say, okay, well then what is the authority or objective viewpoint that you would take to determine which of the two of us are right or wrong about this measure? Yes, ma'am?
Actually, you were about to get to my question. How would you prove to them that you know that happiness is better than they do?
So I wouldn't do that. What I would do is I would run it diagnostically on their side. What do you think is the basis of human happiness? What is it that makes a human happy? Do humans have different capacities for happiness? And you run through all these questions, and you basically come up with the idea of a model of, for any given human being, and by any given human being, I don't mean the average, I mean for any specific human being, i.e. these properties and these laws or governing principles will apply to every single human that you ask. Is it the case that they have a maximum capacity for happiness, or is it potentially infinite? And if it's a maximum capacity, then the next follow-on question is, how do you know basically what percent happiness that you're at? If it's an ever-increasing one, then the question is, how do you know the maximum possible rate?
The assumption is that it is possible to know other people's happiness as an objective.
No, I'm saying that
It's
it's
a model that applies to everybody, isn't it?
I'm saying that I'm asking them that you should ask that person, is there a model that applies to everybody? And let them be the ones who drive all those answers. And then once you do so, though, but I mean, we could do it as an example. And let's do it as an example and see. Do you think that happiness, that that any given human being has, not the same, not like if somebody can be a 17 happy on some absolute scale, and the other person might only be able to be a 12 happy. But for each individual person, do you think they have a maximum capacity for happiness?
I don't think happiness can be measured that way.
How do you think happiness is measured?
Probably a way that doesn't get defined by math.
How do you measure your own happiness? Are you ever happier at some times than you are at others?
Well, there's happiness within a moment.
Yes.
There's emotional happiness. There's also lifetime fulfillment.
Yes.
Purpose, which might include a lot of suffering.
Yes. Right?
There's a core knowledge of who you are that we grow to.
Yes.
Which also might include a lot of suffering, but also you have to keep in mind other people's happiness in that growth.
Yes.
So there are a lot of ways to define happiness.
Yes.
I wouldn't presume to measure it.
So how do you define it?
I just did.
Well, you said there are different ways you can think of it, but you didn't define it.
That's because the definition is beyond the sentence.
Okay. If you had to,
In my opinion.
if you had to make a definition of happiness.
I don't wanna take up everybody's
Oh, you don't. Well, I mean, but this is a great.
Someone else had a question.
Okay. Okay. Well, if you don't, there's also the if you don't want to talk. Yeah. All right.
I'll pick up there.
Yeah.
So, we all experience happiness in different avenues of life, be it, childhood happiness, happiness with a partner.
Let's say that I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a new person come to the English language. You keep using the word happiness. Tell me what you mean.
A good feeling,
Okay.
I guess.
All right.
You feel good.
Yes.
Um,
And by good here, you mean like not that you feel morally good, because I understand it, but that like it's a
almost like a radiating good.
yeah, a feeling that's more positive. Like if it's a direction that you wanted to head, you want to head more in the direction of that and not avoid it. So bad feelings are things that you want to go away from. Good feelings are things you want to go to. Okay, I got you now.
So you associate all your happiness with kind of your experiences. So what you did as a child, experiencing time with your family created happiness for you. Getting something that you longed for, an object, a game, gives you happiness.
Okay.
And then something like being with a partner, the feelings you experience with them are kind of similar. You get that excited, radiating feeling. And I mean, maybe you can measure it in the way that I'm more happy with this than I was with that.
Yes.
But to try to put that on a mathematical scale, I mean, looking at myself, I don't know if I would do that. I know I'm very happy when I get something I want as an object.
Well, I think I heard you say that you can at least do it comparatively. This makes me happier than that does. Okay, so you can order these things.
Yes.
Okay, well, if you can order them, then you are at least. No, oh yeah, sorry.
Yes. So comparing it to for myself.
Yeah.
Yes. I can't compare other people.
That's, yeah.
So I will just simply point out that and I'm not making an argument for mathematics. If you talk to anybody who's been in class for a while, you'll know that I think there are major flaws at the very basis of mathematics, and that we need a new mathematics period to move forward, because the maths that we're using now contain logical contradictions in them. But my conclusion is the one thing that is consistent in mathematics is that they can be ordered, that numbers are well ordered. And so I actually think that all infinites are ordinals, or in fact one set of ordinals. So not ordinals of ordinals, but just simply an ordinal. So there is a lowest level of happiness, and there's a highest level of happiness, and that you can order these, and they are well ordered in that you can say, this one right here is less than all of these, but more than all of those. So if that's the case, you have a foundation for mathematics, because all mathematics is simply a variant of counting and comparing. That's all math is counting and comparing at base. So if I can well order and I'm not here to offer some measurement theory. All I'm saying is we know we can at least order broadly relatively, makes me more happy than that. So whether, I don't mean to make the argument of, hey, if you're living a proper heterosexual lifestyle, then you'll be a 17 happy. And if you're living the maximum possible homosexual lifestyle, you're going to top out at 7.2. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, in comparatively, that you can always make the same argument. That for that person, let the person say it for themselves, the things that make me the happiest are these things. And what I mean by that is when I talk to my homosexual friends, I don't come up with, none of them turn around and say things like, no, I love more than anything else sex. That's it. Like, there's nothing greater in life than that. And if anybody does make a statement like the same thing, heterosexual, none of them will say that is the greatest thing in life. I'll be like, greater than love? And they'll say, they may jokingly say yes, but in reality, but ultimately when you get down to it, they're like, no, love is being in a high state of love where that will make you feel better, and maybe to the point of like over time, so how much of this are you taking as like a peak relative emotional feeling versus something that's enduringly happy, which is why I still like to talk about it in mathematical terms, but for those that are not mathematical in their thinking, more mathematical in their thinking, do it simply comparatively. Like over time, this is what makes me feel better, or that I have more of the good. And so when you ask people to order the things that actually make them happy in life, at the top of it are things like love and relationship and feeling that you're doing good, feeling that you're making a difference, feeling that you have a purpose. These things are always at the top. The things that are at the bottom vary, but these things are never at the bottom, and these other things are never at the top. These are always consistently the top things. So a presumably good argument would be, if these are the things that are consistently at the top when it comes to contributing to your happiness, then you have to find out what the bases are for these right here, and how you would go about having more of that and less of this. Because ideally, whether you take it mathematically or not, you would say, the way for me to be the happiest should be take away all the things that make me unhappy and increase to the maximum all the things that will make me happy, and that should be a better approach than any other approach we can specify. So, go ahead.
So you went to happiness relatively easily, and the young lady introduced sacrifice into happiness. Why is happiness where you went? Because what does happiness have to do with how we should live? Because there's all kinds of things that make you happy that aren't necessarily good for you. And I know you also did relative happiness.
Yes.
But why not fulfillment? Why not goodness? Why not something else?
Well, I think ultimately we do the things that we do because we think that they will make us the most happy. So the reason that we do the stuff, I use always an example of marathon running. Marathon running, for even when you ask the most avid marathon runner out there, you say, at which mile of the marathon does it not hurt? And their answer is like, at best, the first.
Right.
And then after that, like, you can plot misery, and it just increases all the way to the point where you get this little charge at the finish line, and that's it. And that charge at the finish line is nowhere near the equal of all this stuff. And I'm like, why are you doing this? Like, you're intentionally engaging in voluntary physical suffering for hours at a time in a way that you have told me yourself is damaging to your body, and you need X amount of time in order for your body to recover so that you can walk around without looking like you're, lame. And, a little bit of hyperbole here. But the idea is, well, I do that because it brings me joy. Well, where does it bring you joy? It brings me joy in sense of accomplishment. So these are the things that are up at the top. The physical suffering is present and endures for a while, and over the total amount of time, you're like, well, how much are you thinking about winning if these aren't people that win the marathon, these are people who come in at the end of it, they still like this kind of thing. So it's not recognition, it's not, but what happens, I think, over time, when I've talked to enough of folks who live this way, is they believe that it's better to be a person, and we all have something in our life like marathon running where you're like, this, it seems like a lot of what you're doing doesn't make you happy, but you say, well, that's the kind of person I want to be. And that's what makes me happier. Is I want to be a person who takes tough challenges. And so the temporary suffering of this, in comparison to me knowing that in my true identity, I'm a person that can run the distance that poor guy in marathon ran and killed him, and I can do this. Like, that might be a reasonable explanation of why. So I think there's some supervening principle that leads us to believe that the suffering qua suffering does not bring us happiness. Suffering for the purpose of, fill in the blank, of greater good that we already had at the top of the stack is what makes us happy. It's the but-for reasoning there.
Yeah, I think the problem we face here is the limits of language. We're trying to express something and use terms that we have in our language, like happiness and joy and pleasure and so forth, that are imprecise. Our language right now is imprecise. And we have different spectrums, like you say, of this concept that we're trying to express. Look at Paul. He's in a dungeon, which is nothing but a cellar in the middle of Rome, knee-deep in poop. Yet he expresses, or our Bible uses the term contentment and peace. So how can you be content, which is a form of happiness, and have peace when you're in such a miserable condition?
And Paul is in mile 24 in his own belief of his marathon. And so he got 2 more miles to go, and he will be the champion.
So
That's the idea.
There are many ways to express this notion that we have, that you're trying to express here.
So I agree with that, but I also want to point out, like, was nobody impressed with the definition for happy that he came up with extemporaneously? It was less than 5 words long, and all of us were like, that's about right. Like, that guy should be a lexicographer. I don't know what. I think we all know intrinsically what happiness is. We all know that we can be happier rather than not happy. It's interesting, isn't it, that we resist certain forms of happiness as objectionable. We got to know why we do. And we tend to only do that in terms of, not only, but we tend to often do that in terms of a moral stack that we state. As to say, I recognize that you're saying that this might make me happier, but that either implies a moral state or it's against my own moral beliefs. And that's interesting in that I think we often bring our own moral beliefs into part of our description of what makes us happy. In short, as an example, we know that earning more money, we would be happier if our paycheck was bigger, right? We would report that. Now, whether the long-term deliverances of that are true, whether it's more money, more problems is correct philosophy, or whether it's like, no, this would be easier if my paycheck increased by 7% every paycheck. Like, let's say that was the case. And that would make us happy. Well, it doesn't make us happy. Why doesn't it make us happy then if we successfully pull off a bank robbery? Now, for you, some people, it may make them happy, but you wouldn't be happy about that. Why? Well, Dostoevsky writes brutally and repeatedly and way too long on the topic of the guilt that comes along with this diminishes our happiness. And so there are 2 ways to live through life. One way is to figure out where the guilt is and how it impacts us, which is what we all do, I would argue. And there's other is to attempt to live a completely guilt-free life. But what do we call people who live a completely guilt-free life? Psychopaths. Yes. Okay, now the question is whether psychopaths are wrong. So I put the question to you. On the eve of the joyous wedding, is psychopathy evil? Or are psychopaths the only ones who have it right?
Wow. You just did that, man.
Yeah. So the question is this, to put it in a less, obviously, offensive mindset. How much does the moral have to do with our own happiness?
Oh, absolutely. So, good question.
That's the question I'm asking, right? That's why, provocatively, I'm asking, are psychopaths wrong? But psychopaths are the people who have adopted. Sociopaths are, I know what's right and wrong, I don't care. Psychopaths are like, what are you talking about? Right and wrong. This right and wrong you're talking about are constructs. I don't know what you mean. There's only that which makes me happy and that which does not make me happy. And I'm in pursuit of the happy.
A couple of thoughts, and I'm not going to answer your question right away, but to Michael's point earlier, navel gazing, I think, at some point in life, we will be in a storm where the waves are higher than we are, right? And then the question is, when everything seems to be going sideways, what do we base our belief on? And the Ephesians 6 talks about the knowledge of salvation being our helmet, safeguarding our mind and our heart. And I think there's a lot to be said in that understanding those things. And it also makes us more bold as we talk to other people as well. So there's one thing. The second thing, more to your point, we've sort of focused on this intellectual mode. However, I'm still firmly convinced that most, if not all, decisions are made in the end emotional. And that goes from the time we were born. Not bringing up, and you and I argued about your use of the term happiness versus joy, whatever. But as we grow up and as we work through life and we are hit by these waves, we will find ways to make it through those storms. And sometimes those are healthy ways, resourceful ways, leaning on things that are good and healthy for us. And sometimes it's the exact opposite.
A lot we can discuss there, but I want to say, like,
Can I just finish?
with your permission, just because you're consistently here.
I haven't hit the.
I know, but what I want to say is this: all of this, I would say, is not relevant to the main point that we're asking here. In directly answering the bottom. Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
But those methods of making our way through lives become part of us, and so and that will be necessarily a dissonance, right? As you were talking.
Necessarily a
dissonance.
Yes.
And so when we.
I don't know necessarily, but let's say that almost all in all cases. Yes.
Almost all in all cases, there will be some dissonances within there because this is how I learned to get my way through life, and it has become a part of me for better or worse. Many times it's for worse. It's unhealthy or unresourceful. So when we approach someone with this intellectual and logical point, and it hits up against, that bumps up against who we are, because we are fully invested in this way of getting through life, then you're going to be drawn to toss that aside. And you're going to be drawn towards whether it's healthy or not. And I've seen this time and time again. And that's based in a gazillion things. That's based in, someone made fun of me because I spoke and I stuttered in class one day. Whatever it is. It could be, my mother died or my father left when I was 20. And I don't trust, whatever that is, that's going to bump up against it. And so these are things we really haven't discussed, and those are so deep within the identity of the person that you're not going to get to intellectually. You just got to sit with them.
My objection to this line of reasoning is not that this might not be true, but all this you're couching in the terms of this is explanatory of why we do the things we do. And this is
why we reject logical thought.
But you've also used this is how we survive, this is how we get through life, this is whatever. The question is not about how do we survive. The question is how do we maximize, are we in pursuit of happiness, and how do we maximize that?
Yeah, but you made those choices, you found those ways because in that moment you thought this was my best way to be happy in this scenario. It may be so-and-so.
No, that is the opposite of what you said. What you said was we make decisions emotionally, not necessarily for reasons.
No. There's two different things. So
okay.
So-and-so did X, Y, Z, and if I found that if I did this, I could manipulate them to do what I want.
Right.
Now, I'm doing that for my own happiness, but that is deeply unhealthy. Right?
So when you say an emotional decision, I picture something like this. I picture somebody in a relationship that they care about, where the other person, they've had a long day, they were tired, rough day at work, dog was run over that day, all the things that can make it a terrible day. And they end up in a argument with the other person. Right. And they say in their own mind, like, the other person finally says something and they're like, look, I know this isn't, wow, I know this is a bad idea, but, and then they tear into the other person or they physically punch them or whatever else. So right before that time, they would have said, basically, I know this is not going to make me happy in the long run, but I'm going to do this, but forgive the language, screw that, I'm going to do this anyway.
So
everybody's been there. That to me is an emotional decision. A decision where you turn around and say, I feel the emotion of love when I'm with Katie, and therefore I'm going to marry her. that is there's an emotion involved in that one, but you're making a logical, like, this emotion increases my happiness, and so I'm going to do the things that lead me to have more of that emotion and happiness. Like that, those are two different ideas.
So I would agree with what you said, but I think, let's take a simple example. I need a car. I do all the research. This car gets better mileage. This one's better maintenance-wise, blah, blah, blah. And in the end, I choose my car out of a suite of all viable options because, dang, it just looks good. And I think when I drive down the road, people are like, wow.
Right.
Everyone does that. Even in your view of, I've gone through all the viable options, and I see this is the logic, but in the end, I'm doing it for my joy, for my happiness.
But you have to be specific. So I like let's use your example, because this encapsulates everything we've been asking about.
Yeah.
So here's a car that we want to buy. And if I asked the reasons, what are the factors in buying a car? You might say value. You might say reliability. You might say what other people will think of me. You might say practicality. You might, who knows, whatever else. I guess we said value cost. So that, blah, blah, blah. Here's all the other things. What you told me was, at the end, so if you sit down with, this is one of my objections, is that if you sit down with people and you ask them, rank order, which of these are more important and less important, and give them some weight or value so that we can make a reasoned judgment about what we should do. And it's been, I'm always coming back to mathematical. The one with the higher score is the one that's going to give you. The one that you emotionally engage with the most is the one that's going to give you. And you may say, well, to me, it's all about value. But if what you said was, at the end of it, well, I'm going to buy that one because what? What did you say?
You could also say...
No, but what did you say? What did you say?
I said because I just think...
You said...
I had a toy car when I was a kid, and this is the car that looked like
Yeah, but what he said... That's not what he said. I'm asking what he said. What he said in that case was, driving down the road, I'm going to look cooler in this one than anything else. So what he actually said was, I can tell you all day long these other things are important to me, but I just made my decision based on this factor. This emotion. Say again.
That is based in emotion.
Yeah, I do. So here's an emotion right here. The emotion is, I feel like I got a good deal. Here's an emotion right here, which is I don't have to deal with this nonsense all the time. Here's an emotion right here. This was the emotion that turned out to be the one that you cared about the most. So you made a reasoned decision based on the emotion that was most important to you.
So
That's the point I'm trying to make. Yes, sir.
If I can just make this faster.
Yeah, go ahead.
And to Michael's point as well, I think you use logic, and I think this is in our Christian belief as well. We use logic to get to a certain point, and then that last instant is typically, if not always, an emotional decision. And I think this logical, philosophical views and way to reason things out makes Christianity a live object, which is not to be diminished. That idea you cannot minimize.
So I hear what you're saying, but that makes me angry, and so I'm not going to listen to it.
Well, fair enough. And that would be your illogical decision, right? That would butt against what I'm saying.
But who in this room thinks that that's a good way to make decisions?
Well, I didn't say it was.
But we're talking about good ways. Okay.
No,
No, we're not. No, we're not. I'm sorry. I'm not talking about how people make decisions solely. I'm talking about how people ought to make decisions.
Oh yeah, but that was not the question.
This whole conversation is that. Me asking the question of how ought we make decisions has to do not with, again, I'll take you back to, I didn't say my way of doing things is the right way. What I said was, when I'm having in a discussion with somebody else, ask them, how do you think is the right way to make a decision?
Yeah. Most people
And then the question is, if there's a right way to make a decision for that person, the next logical question is that a universal method? How do you know that? I'm asking you. You're the one who claimed knowledge. I don't know it. You made a knowledge claim. You said the answer to that is no. Yes, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, my point is, I'm not, the question that I'm asking is, of each individual person, do you know what it takes to make you happy? And then subsequently, why do you think that's the case? Why do you think that's true? So you might say something, and this is the problem, maybe you could say, we're all trapped in our own concept of what happiness could be for us. So when I turn around and say something, well, for me, this is my way to being the most happy. The natural question ought to be, how do you know that that's going to make you the most happy? Like, do you know it because you've comparatively tried it against a bunch of other things? Do you know it because you came through some reasoning process that delivered that knowledge to you? Do you know it because somebody you think is a key authority figure told you that was the case and you believed it? You claim that you know how to be happy. What makes you think you know how to be happy? Why are you the only person in the world who knows what it is to make you happy? Maximally. Or whatever the happiest is that you can be.
This is a very important thing, but it's running up against the threat of, what do you say to someone who says that the individual has to decide for themselves what makes them the most happy, and everyone has to
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
The individual has to decide for themselves what makes them the most happy.
Yes. Yes.
And happiness is, at the end of the day, the individual maximizing their own preferences.
Yes. Say that again.
Maximizing their own preferences.
Why do you think that's the case?
There's a big cultural worldview, call it subjectivism.
Yes. Yeah, okay.
Where basically everyone is kind of deciding for themselves what is good or not good, or happy or unhappy.
Right,
or,
right.
This is America. You invent yourself. You decide for yourself what makes you happy. You pursue your dreams. No one can tell me what my dreams ought to be.
Right, right.
What is that? How do you get out of that?
But that's exactly what I'm saying. Don't tell people what makes them happy. Ask them what makes them happy. And then ask them how they justify that. So if someone makes a claim to knowledge, look, I know this is the case. It's entirely reasonable and fair and kind and loving to ask the question, how do you know that's the case? And I'll give you an example. Dennis knows it's the case that there is no God, but we think he's going to be happier if he doesn't think that's the case. All right? Your child who's on heroin knows that heroin makes him happier than anything else, but you know that that's not the case. So why is it at some point you have to ask the question of, is it reasonable what you think that you know? Question for you, do you think that most of what you know is true? And what's your reason for believing that? Or what's the emotion that drives you to believe that kind of thing?
That was the point I was trying to make.
It kind of go on again with Mike, just what about people who said, I don't need to justify it. It's for me, I'm not forcing it on you, so I don't need to justify it.
Then why do you believe it?
Because it's worked for me so far.
How do you know that? How do you know it's worked for you better than another course of action would have?
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. You don't believe that you're pursuing the course of action that's going to make you as happy as you can be?
I mean, does that matter if I'm fine with how I am?
If you claim that being happy is what why are you fine with how you are?
I mean, I'm going through life how I am right now.
I know that's a statement of what you're doing, but why are you fine with it? You say I'm fine with it.
Well, it's the argument's sake. It's just saying, if I feel that life is working for me right now, do I need a justification for that?
Well, only if you think that if I'm asking you for your reasoning or why you're doing, have you ever done anything in life that made you less happy, that made you not fine? And if the answer is, yeah, there's stuff in life that made me not fine, which I think anybody honestly answering the question is yeah, I did this and I was not fine. I'm fine with what's going on now. Okay, so you avoided the not fine and you're doing what makes you fine. That's the same, we're using different words. We avoided that which is bad or not good in favor of what makes it good. Fine in this case is now just a stand-in for happy. So what you said was, I'm avoiding the things that don't make me happy, and right now I'm happy. And then I'm asking the question of this. If you have yourself said, it was good for me to avoid the things that make me not fine or not happy in order to do the things that are now making me happy, why would you not also continue to do that and say the thing that I'm doing right now comparatively if I just knew a little bit more, or if I thought about things a different way, or if I understood something more about my identity or whatever it was. Turns out that what I'm doing right now, actually, I'm not fine. Not compared to what I could be. So here I could be way happier than I am right now.
But if I don't know about that and I'm content with how I am, is that a problem?
But that question has to go back to you. I'll ask you this. If it was the case, like if you realized, if you had this epiphany of like, I don't know what I'm doing, I could be 10 times happier than I am right now. All I'd have to do is to walk through that door and literally, physically walk through that door instead of walking through this door. If that would make me 10 times happier than this one, which door would you walk through?
Yeah, but that doesn't, I mean, just kind of being honest, like, that doesn't take work. That's not, like, if we're talking about happiness is something you're gonna have to work at, like, choosing a door is easy. But if we're talking about, I have to, climb over that mountain, swim through that lake, and, run a marathon, or I can walk through this door, why not just go through this door, because I'm okay right now.
Because you yourself don't believe that. So when you say that, that's not the truth. And now you've got your thumb on the scale. Here's why. What was the difference between the things that didn't make you happy and you're fine right now, you're adequately happy right now. Are you working at all to do that? Or are you just laying on the couch 24/7? Presumably you have a job.
Yeah.
Okay, well, guess what? That's called work. That's literally the word we use for it. In fact, you're probably at that like 8 hours a day. And then it probably takes you an additional hour either way to get there or whatever else. And so most of your day is taken up with work. So in order for you to be fine, that is to say, quit your job, and are you less fine now? Arguably, you at least think you are, you wouldn't be doing the job. So you say you don't want to work for happiness, but you're already working for happiness. So you're not being honest with yourself. That's the important part.
I feel the proportion of happiness to work I'm putting in is fine.
Okay. If what you're saying is the maximum happiness is a ratio of work I put into the stuff that I get out, and what does that imply about the work? It must be diminishing your happiness. Okay, so there is some optimal rate. I agree with that, right? And in fact, this is a great question to ask to the super high-performing CEOs and all this kind of stuff. There's a lot of data out there that says, like, they're on the backside of the curve, right? They're working really, really hard. They have what people are calling them success, but they're doggone miserable. So back it up a little bit. There's some lesser level that will maximize the happiness. But the point is you're maximizing the happiness. That's all I'm saying. That's not always true. Where is it not true? Oh, okay, Roger.
Said, I've been rich and I've been poor. And he said, I like to be rich a lot better than I like to be poor.
Right, but I'm saying he's found the top of the curve.
I'm just saying, like, if you were on the top of the hill, you're a long way from Mount Everest.
You're making my point now, sir. Why did you get to the top of the hill in the first place? If the idea was like, I like being on the top of the hill, and someone's like, there's the biggest hill in the world. Are you like, well, I stopped liking to be on the top of the hill? No, you didn't. You're on the top of this hill, and you're staying on the top of this hill. Maybe the reason you're not climbing Mount Everest is one of the following. I don't really think that I can get there. 2, I don't actually think it's as high as people are saying. 3, there's a serious chance that I'm going to die on the way up there, and that's going to make my happiness level go to 0, right? So like, there could be reasons that you don't climb Mount Everest. But if somebody said to you, you can walk through the door and climb Mount Everest, and you'd be on top of Mount Everest. Now, here's what I will tell you, and this is the Zen version of Christianity. I always like to say it. When you believe what is true, it is effortless. And that you're not fighting yourself. The only battle that we don't like fighting is fighting ourselves. Fighting other people, fine. Sometimes a lot of fun. Okay? Fighting ourselves always decreases our happiness. And when you can get to the point, like Paul did, where he's like, I'm looking around the dungeon and it doesn't bother me. You know why? And for Paul, it was easy. He says, in comparison to the riches and glory that I know that I will have, this temporary suffering is nothing, right? And the strong, like I've run long distance stuff, and I don't have whatever the marathoners do. I have this very logical cognitive approach of like, this is terrible, and when I add up and integrate over time, that is not equal what's on the other side of this inequality, and somebody needs to recognize that the greater than sign is pointed the other way than the rest of these lunatic psychopaths think that it is. So I think I was a Force Recon Marine officer in Okinawa, and one of our toughest guys, captains, was out there, and he was running the Kadena Marathon, and he was in mile 16 or whatever one of the more miserable miles is. And in marathons, you fall in with people roughly at your pace, and you talk in order to take your mind off the obvious suffering that you're going through no good reason. And so this lady fit, she looked a little bit older than he, but good form, all that stuff, talking. Hey, what are you doing? Why are you here? You're running a marathon. Why are you here? Oh, I'm a Force Recon captain out Camp Schwab, blah, blah, blah. Tough guy. She's like, oh, you're a Marine. Yeah, yeah. She goes, oh, that's awesome. My grandson's a Marine. Anyway, it's been nice talking to you. And then she leaves him. And he was like, that's the single most demoralizing moment that I've ever had in my life, is when Grandma was like, that's cute, bye, and left him in her dust. He was like, that mile 16 was the hardest mile 16 I've ever had in my life right there. So, again, fighting ourselves. Yes, sir.
Going back to the car example, a lot of people have a situation where the most important thing for them is to be seen as cool, but to be cool is to not care about what other people think.
Right.
So the way to resolve it is that they'll never think about that, and they'll deny it if you ask them or bring it up.
So I will say this, to be cool is the combination of two things. I've thought about this a significant amount, because we pursue a lot of things because we think they're cool. It's not that you don't care about what other people think. It's that you don't care about what other people think, and other people think that that's desirable, and they still put you higher up in the relative order of merit. So there are people who are miserable in society who don't care what other people think, but they're not considered cool. And there are people who are happier in society that don't care what other people think, but they're not considered cool. It's not in virtue of that. Okay, so we're out of time. Let me link it up. First, pending congratulations. Welcome to everybody in town. Thank you very much for being a part of all this. And thank you for sharing your pre-wedding day with us here in Solid Ground. You've enriched it, and with the people you brought and with your very presence. So we thank you for that. Best of luck tomorrow. Anything that you need, I know everybody here in Solid Ground stands by to do anything from mere well-wishing all the way out to okay, you need chairs unfolded and put here or there, let us know. And then, just to wrap this up, where we're headed with all of this, and I think where we may continue the next time, depending on whether you want to go on the topic you suggested or not. What I would suggest to everyone is this: you don't want to fight yourself, and that nobody in this room today, right now, is as happy as they can be. And that someone asked the question, I didn't answer it. Why do I think? I think human beings, unarguably, at the end of the day, want two things: happiness and immortality. They want to be happy for as long as they possibly can. And the reason that Christianity bears looking into is it at least makes the claim that it has the solution to what it takes to be maximally happy eternally. And for that reason, you ought to at least look at it. Because in short, there are very few claim solutions out there that do that. So it's worthwhile at least investigating. Okay, thank you very much. Welcome, best of luck, have fun. Maximize your own happiness.